everybody, and welcome back to OTT Executive Podcast. I'm Brian Mahoney, your host, the president of the OTT Executive Community and CEO of Trend Research. Today, I'm joined by Beth Anderson from BBC Studios. Welcome, Beth.
Hello, Brian. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me on the show.
All right, I'm so glad you made time for this. We met. I moderated a panel back in June in Denver, long way for you, at the Stream TV show, and that was illuminating. I think it was a really good. That's a really good show, and but there was so much more I wanted to kind of drill down on and sort of pick your brain. So I'm glad we get a chance to do that today.
Thank you. I absolutely love that panel. I can't believe it was as many months ago as it is now. And I have been accused of being a fast talker. So I will try and moderate the speed of my speech when I'm talking impassioned tones about this business because it is really exciting and such an interesting moment in the business. So yeah, I'm happy to dive in always.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, fast, so to speak, right? You know, speak fast about fast. We'll be definitely covering that at some point. So, but why don't we
Yeah.
start with this, Beth? We like to sort of personalize some of the leaders in the industry, get to know a little bit about you and your career background. Just tell us kind of how you got your start and how you got to your role today.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I suppose my career path has been slightly unusual because of my more creative education. I went to drama school and qualified as a theatre director. Spent a little bit of time.
No way. That's so cool. I did not know that about you. Wow.
Yeah, I love the theatre, and one of the reasons why I love it so much, I think like the drama background is just super interesting because it helps you understand there's more value in understanding and collaborating with other people. You get more creative ideas when there's more than one voice in the room.
Yes.
And B, that you have this very beautiful, terrifying moment where your creative is presented to a room full of people and you have live reaction to that content in a way that just is, oh, it puts the hairs on the back of your neck on edge, but it is wonderful and it changes the creative ultimately. The viewer becomes part of the experience. And
Yes.
when I did join the BBC, which was phenomenally 2007. It was it was quite a while
That's
ago.
amazing. No one stays in jobs that long. You must really love it there. That's great.
I do. I really believe in what we're doing, and I think that one of the reasons why I believe in it so much is because the audience is at the heart of the BBC. And when I joined there originally in London, I walked into every room and just was surrounded by the smartest people I've ever met. Very
And the
impactful.
history and the tradition of
And
the
the
BBC.
history
I mean,
and the tradition
amazing.
and the responsibility as well to be part of helping to fund the way in which we're creating content and helping to support the license fee
Yep.
for the UK and being able to also be an ambassador for what BBC content is around the world. So I've always been part of the commercial side of the BBC Studios, as it's now known. But all the time I've been working in the digital space.
Yes.
My first jobs were about how to put ringtones on telephones and how to put clips on YouTube, actually. And I started to look at the data coming back, and it just reminded me of that theatrical experience of saying that the content is changed by the viewer experience.
Oh,
And
100%.
and it was
Yeah,
just
we
so
forget sometimes that our business at the end of the day is still all about storytelling, right?
absolutely. And what a privilege. And I think because the duty of the BBC is to create programming that reflects and resonates with all people in the UK. We live
Mhm.
in a global society, and a lot of the types of creative storytelling that exist in the beautiful production community in the UK
Mhm.
resonate fantastically with audiences around the world in a very local fashion, not in a way of just being an export and we are a fish out of water. We
Yes.
are a fish out of water, but we're very proud to be in America. And I think that you get a different resonance with the storytelling when
Mhm.
you bring it outside of its home country. And being able to see that kind of data and come back and
Mhm.
see people responding to content that was brand new was very intoxicating. And that
So
started
big,
the
big
whole
secret
journey.
to our
Yeah.
audience. we're all acting, right? To a certain
Yes.
degree, we're all playing a role on a stage, out, brief candle of life, right? So full disclosure, I was a theater kid. I
You
got my
were.
start in fourth grade as the Artful Dodger in Oliver Twist.
Oh, please say there's pictures. I want to see.
Oh no, no, no. I think I had my grandfather's top hat and they put like charcoal in my face to make me look like I was a, street urchin. But yeah, so I totally get it. And I just think it's really interesting that your background, just
Yeah,
because we can't forget that. We can't forget whether it's storytelling around news or creative or whatever it is, like there's a human element there. And sometimes we get so lost into the technology or the business we forget about that's why people are engaged with our content, right?
absolutely. Absolutely. And they carry it with them. And I've sat around many a table and had people tell me about something they watched last night or something that they read or something that they listened to that meant something to them and reminded them or contextualized something that was going on in their head. And I love being part of that journey and recognizing that the transportation of what was an original idea in the British Isles can be as resonant and as impactful at any time as
Hmm.
well. And I think, what we initially, I was working a lot with content that had already aired. And I've stayed with that because I do think that there is a presence with programming that has already had its initial broadcast, and
Hmm.
and it can be um, as new to a new audience, someone who hasn't come across it as something that was filmed yesterday.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that there is that's just been wonderful because the company, the BBC has been around since 1922, so we have a fair share of programs to play with, and figuring out how to build sort of an audience experience that people want to stay with.
Yes.
And do that in the way of recognizing the other amazing IP that might exist on a platform has been a creative and powerful
So
journey,
so
which is why I've
let's
stayed at the
let's
same
talk
company
about
for so long.
thank you for that. Let's dig a little bit deeper. So your background through digital, what is your current role? What is your current purview? What are you working on right now?
Yeah, I am the SVP of Fast Channels and VOD sales
Hmm.
for BBC Studios. I predominantly have an Americas remit. But also because the fast business specifically is relatively new into the flywheel of media, I have also been helping sort of as an ambassador inside the organization to help bring other kind of territories online as the markets need. So yes, that's my job title, and I work again still with predominantly streaming environments, but across all types of rights models uh, and finding the right content for the right platform to
Hmm.
reach the audiences where they are is
Yeah, and a
basically
lot of people, I mean, the let's talk about fast a little bit
yeah,
because the bars to entry are lower, right? But in some ways, I think there's a higher bar in terms of the responsibility for proper curation and,
yes,
programming that channel, whatever it might be, to the audience. Can you
yeah.
talk about that a little bit? You can't just throw a bunch of content out there without any kind of strategy and expect an audience to really, engage with it.
No, absolutely. And I sort of I equivocate it a little bit to building a mixtape because I'm that old. But I used to build these cassettes for my friends, and they'd be a letter, or they'd be something that I thought would be meaningful for them. Um, and I think that's what we're doing. We're creating something as fans of a media type that we enjoy, which is something that we hold dear in our scheduling team, that they are absolutely TV fans first and foremost, and will watch the stuff that they're
Mhm.
scheduling, and then sharing that playlist with other people, and then using that that through line that I mentioned at the beginning of my career of data to say, okay, that how did that resonate? Did that work? Maybe if we do something else, oh, that's popped in a different way than I was expecting. Maybe there's more play that we can do there.
Mhm.
Sort of early on in the journey of fast, I love a bit of alliteration. So we did a world's weirdest Wednesdays, based on the fact that our world's weirdest homes content did really well on our BBC Home and Garden channel. And that sort of sparked different forms of building a playlist, a channel, a schedule,
Hmm.
and helped us pivot into more and more pieces. So when we first started this business, we were focusing on single series IP, which is obviously a huge part of the fast landscape and
Yes.
still is very, very impactful today. We started with our Antiques Roadshow channel and our Classic Doctor Who
Love that
channel.
show. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's fantastic and reaches a ton of different audiences now because of that. But those initial sort of tests and the way in which programming was sort of percolating allowed us to then say, oh, well, there's a world outside of single series IP where we might be able to see content in more of a genre base. So
Mhm.
how can we bring our BBC trusted brand into that space? How can we broaden this out further? And there's
Mhm.
something here about factual entertainment, and that led
So
to a
I
sort of
want to interject for 1 second.
Mhm.
So you talked about sort of this initial process of, kind of, throwing, not throwing, but in a creative way, maybe through trial and error, creating some of those initial fast channels. In what way has that changed today, where we may perhaps have a more analytical approach? What is the role of data, and what is the balance between creativity, curation, basically using all of your human faculties with science and data to sort of help us figure out how to tailor that content to the right audience.
Yeah, I think part of that the data is showing some sort of diversification in popularity of programming dependent on the platform in which we're serving it. So you won't see all of our platform. You might have seen us originally sort of want to be ubiquitously available with all of our channels on all of our platform partners, and that strategy has changed over time based on the data. So there's that sort of curation of our total channel collection because we have 15 channels.
Hmm.
Um, it is in itself something that we're using data to inform which platform partners we're working with, and we want to make sure that that platform is also working with us on that and collaborating with us, and happy with the channel set that we're doing and complementing not just within ourselves but also with what other content is on the service and where do we
Hmm.
fit best.
So you're
um
sort of doing portfolio management with those different channels.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Portfolio management across the platform is one of the key data sets. And then within the channels themselves, where does it make sense to have our content sit? So if there's something like our BritBox Mysteries channel or our New Trick Silent Witness channel, which is two single series IPs in one channel. How do we program that to be sympathetic to the time of day when people are likely going to be watching it? For
Mhm.
new tricks, it's much more of it's lighter, and it's more likely to be something that you might watch earlier in the day. So that tends
Mhm.
to be something that we populate during our daytime hours. Whereas something like Silent Witness, which is a phenomenal show, is more cerebral in nature and slightly darker in tone. So we wouldn't
Mhm.
necessarily schedule that during the day. And that's something that we've been paying attention to as the data has come in and thinking again about ourselves as viewers first. So yes, there's information about the view count that's coming in, but also there's us watching our own channels, watching our own content, and getting that feedback from
And you
other
get a
people
lot of
watching
insights
them.
there, right? I mean,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
that's not going away. A lot of people talk about AI and the robots are going to take over and stuff. There's always going to be a human element, and AI will, automate the things that can be automated, right? Maybe you can give a perspective on that. What role do you see AI playing in the future of programming, content management?
I think that technology is a gift. I think that we're moving at an incredible pace with development, and there are so many ways that we can use technology in the service of human endeavor. That's generally my philosophy here is that the creative spark first comes from humans. And there are ways in which we can facilitate very repetitive tasks with technology, and that can create massive efficiencies, massive productivity. But if we create something that is, essentially entirely generated and powered by AI, I feel like it would collapse in on itself.
Mhm.
And you would start to see just the same thing
That's a
appearing. I
good
mean,
way to put it because it's your every AI engine is being trained by data, by past experience, right? So
exactly.
you can kind of dig this rut of familiarity, and then content discovery is gone, right?
Exactly. It's a brilliant way of synthesizing the past. It
Mhm.
doesn't provide a complete golden path to what the future should be, because quite often, the way that society develops is not entirely linear. We can spark off in a completely different direction. And we should be ready for that. We should be ready to kind of introduce a new element. And if there is no, existing data that shows that a type of programming could work, because that type of programming has never been tested before, or that way of servicing has never been tested it before, and then a computer wouldn't necessarily be able to
Mhm.
provide you that idea.
Right.
And then once you have that, there's that sort of early moment where there could be a massive blossoming boom of interest in something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be infinite, a hockey
Mhm.
stick growth. So again, you have that sort of human interpretation to say, yes, this is new. There is a sensational nature to having this program, or having this service, or having this media type that will eventually normalize as behavior adapts to it, and will be informed by the different technology partners that come along, or the different ways in which we're watching. Is someone predominantly watching in their living room, or is
Mhm.
someone predominantly watching on their phone whilst they're portable? That will change the type of programming that you feature on the device, and that is always going to come from a human input. But and I also think there's so much that kind of gets grouped under the term AI. There's a lot of really useful tools in machine learning, and I think AI it's a very nebulous term that describes
Yes,
a
true.
lot of things.
Right.
So it's hard to have a kind of cohesive opinion about it, other than to say it is something that could be used in a very supportive light, and also something that you should not expect to do everyone's job for them. In the same way that when we first started the fast business, some of the services were saying, "Oh, great, all I need to do is put a 8 hour loop and just air that 8 hour loop again and
Right.
again."
Go
Much
away and
simpler,
just let
very
it run as
efficient,
if that's going to work, right? Yeah.
but a disservice to the consumer. Yeah.
So I want to change topics a little bit,
Yeah.
because there's a lot going on in the industry right now. There's a lot still working its way through the industry, and there's a lot of challenges. One of the things, obviously, we talk about a lot is just the fragmentation in terms of content, but also, consumers and all their options and everything. No fast channel, no channel of any kind is successful without viewers. Can you talk a little bit about BBC Studios' viewer acquisition strategy? Like, how do you get those eyeballs in the first place? And then we can talk a little bit more about engagement and retention and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that I love fast. I'm a fast advocate. I absolutely adore it. I'm a firm believer that it's part of the media landscape,
Mhm.
and not a cannibalistic replacement of other media types. I think that it is part of the story. I think that people are coming in and discovering BBC content in a lot of different ways, and I celebrate all of them. Someone might have just watched the VP debate on BBC.com, for example, and that's phenomenal. And then out of that, they might find that there's also a whole entertainment division of BBC
Mhm.
that they weren't aware of before. And then they might discover something, and then, in that case, fast is quite a helpful way of introducing what is otherwise quite an intimidating amount of programming
Mhm.
to someone, so that they can try things without any sort of upfront commitment. And there could be a world in
Does
which
that mean that
someone,
you'll place promotions within other genres of content like news and so on to kind of, how do you, what's the strategy, marketing or otherwise, social, to get people in?
yeah, it's really about being where they already are. So
Okay.
for us, on our fast channels, we are promoting the existence of our podcasting business, or
Mhm.
letting people know that BritBox is available. I mean, to the point that we actually have a BritBox Mysteries channel. So we're letting people understand a little bit more about that service, and see how wonderful it is, and interact with it that way. But certainly, also from a kind of a cross channel perspective, we are on our Top Gear channel letting people know about our Antiques Roadshow channel, or our BBC Food channel, and letting people know what else is available on that service, and working really closely with our partners about that. So there's ways of promoting our other businesses inside
Mhm.
our fast channel environment, just like there are ways of surfacing our fast channel, making people aware of it
Is
through the
there
devices that they're on.
is there any kind of best practices you can share with us? Like, how many minutes per hour do you do cross promotion? Like, what channels? You know, what's, because you don't want to, you don't want to
Oh yeah,
oversaturate either. Like,
yeah.
is it just, is it kind of intuitive, like what works, or is there science that says no, you got to do like 2 minutes per hour? Or what? I don't know. Like, how do you figure that out?
I wish that wouldn't it be nice if there was just a formula to do
The
do
AI is
it with?
supposed to tell us this, right?
Yeah, there's an algorithm. No, there's not.
Yeah.
And I think that, the reality is the bigger the potential audience, the more likely that there will be a diversity of
Yeah.
marketing methods that you use. And in the case of, Fast, you have services that are 70 to 80 million monthly active viewers just in the US alone. And the statistic that just got updated for 2028 is that by then, 125 million people in the US alone will be interacting with some kind of fast channel
Yeah.
environment per
The
month.
growth
And,
is
and
quite
the growth is
astounding.
there,
Mhm.
and linear is a really important part of that. But when you have that immediacy of audience, then one strategy is never going to holistically work. And so I think we're always in a sense at day one, we're always trying to say, let's see if this works, and recognize that this might only appeal to 10% of our audience
Mhm.
base, and make them more aware of what else is going on. And then we'll try a different method and see what that kind of preferences, and see where the drift off might happen and where there might be too much, and fundamentally just make sure that there isn't anything that we wouldn't feel comfortable watching ourselves in
Yeah.
terms of frequency. And I do think, with Fast particularly, there is still there's less of an ad load on Fast than there is on more traditional pay
Yes.
TV media types. And I think that that's important.
Mhm.
I think there are some really interesting strategies going on in the market, with some services even sort of collapsing ad breaks where there isn't a suitable ad to place there, to help with retention of that audience for a longer period of time. It
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily have to be you have 7 minutes of content, then 2 minutes of
Just
ads, then
stuff
7 minutes
something
of
in there,
content.
right? That's not relevant.
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
we're working in a world where for the last, near 20 years, there's been a massive influx of video on demand viewership and people watching for incredibly long periods of time.
Right.
And we should not make that a deterrent just because the traditional linear landscape had understandably quite rigid rules because of the
Mhm.
technology available at the time.
Right, and the
There should be
partnerships
more
they had, and
dynamism.
ad inventory being what it is and everything. So,
Yeah.
so you're right. Fast needs to be treated uniquely, right, for that audience and their
Yeah.
mode of watching. It's not just linear via streaming. It's
No.
not just broadcast via streaming. It's different. In what other ways do you think it's different from sort of more traditional, viewing habits?
Well, actually, the technology makes it different
Okay.
because we can be more dynamic with what we're doing. And I think that we're in the infancy of the monetization aspect of Fast. And there is an audience who understands that they're not paying for anything, and so therefore will be comfortable watching ads. That
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily mean the only place where advertising sits is in the middle of a show, breaking from the show. There are so many interesting ways to
Right.
interact and build a commercial relationship in a very honest way with the consumers. And I think that the technology here, this is internet enabled streaming,
Hmm.
that can be very dynamic. We're already doing things with our partners where we're doing custom feeds for them, that fit with their infrastructure and their functionality and what they have on their service, right? And so catering to where our programming is, and where it's sitting and what else is around it, to
Hmm.
create more resonant forms of commercialization, I think could really create a much more diverse commercial portfolio of opportunity
Yes.
for Fast, rather
And
than
I think in
we
some
have to make
ways,
it way.
there's almost a higher, I mean, it's a little bit more lean forward, right?
Yeah,
Because people might be on their phones, whatever.
sure.
There's a little bit more, you said ad inventory is less, so maybe less interruptions, whatever. But there's a slightly higher bar in my mind for authenticity and
Yeah.
connecting with the audience. I just moderated the Stream TV ad summit a couple weeks ago,
Mm.
and one of the complaints was, I'm not going to name the service, but they had back-to-back BMW ads, 12 times
Mhm.
in a row.
Oh
Right.
yeah.
That can't happen. Like
No.
what, that we're completely missing the whole point of fast and what the opportunity is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, frequency capping alone is this
Yes.
business is evolving so rapidly that there's no bad agents. There's just a lot of enthusiasm, right? And the tech is just, trying to catch up
Yes,
with
right.
the consumption, and the consumption is way bigger than most, forecasts had expected by 2024. I think we're at sort of 2025, 2026 numbers now.
Hmm.
And the adoption rates are phenomenal. And that's a testament to the amazing functionality and the amazing platforms that are out there offering the service. And there are a lot of them. We're live on 12 unique platforms with our fast channels today, and we started off with one in
Congrats. That's awesome.
2019. So
Hmm.
it's very diverse, and each of those platforms have different opportunities. So there's no kind of fault in having those happen, but they are learnings. And I think that, yeah, we owe it to the consumer, and we owe it to the advertiser to make sure that there
Yes.
isn't ad exhaustion of the same show. It's
And they're
not
making
quite about
bets, like they're
BMW
making
ad,
it.
is it?
Yeah, I mean the advertisers, they're making bets months ago, right? They're
Yes.
placing their bets. They're coming up with their campaigns or whatever. So you're right. So the innovation is happening so quickly that it's hard to keep pace, right?
Yes. But if you have that as the philosophy, then there's an opportunity to change the game. And
Mhm.
how do you make it so that advertisers can have more immediate, opportunistic ways of developing campaigns that suit the popularity at the time? You
Mhm.
create avenues to simplify the pipes to deliver, the partners that are involved, and think about, the advertiser. I mean, I'd like to call it empathetic selling. You don't build a system just for your own personal interest. You build it for everyone, and you recognize that each person in the three-legged stool of this business between platform advertiser and content owner has different inputs coming at them. So how do you build something that is essentially a minimum viable product at first, and then build on that to benefit not just yourself but everyone, because one person grows, everybody grows.
So let's talk. Let's stick with advertising. Talk about
Mm,
innovation in the advertising space a little bit. One of the things I've been doing a little bit more homework into is shoppable ads.
yeah.
Commerce, advertising. As you mentioned earlier, it's not just placing ads and your inventory. You've got bottom thirds. You've got
Mhm.
parallel activity on the phone.
Yeah.
Where do you see this right now in terms of the state of the art? Are there any innovations that BBC Studios is kind of focusing on right now or experimenting with?
Think we're open to partnering with people when they're coming up to this type of new functionality. I think, there's really interesting movements in virtual product placement,
Mhm.
and how we are introducing that in a way that doesn't affect the original editorial is really important. And that, that a consumer knows that they're being advertised to. So this is, again, something in its infancy, and something that we're closely monitoring in the market. Things like how we can deal with squeeze backs or
Mhm.
QR codes, and how the adoption rates are tracking for those. How do we create real estate around the screen in the same
Mhm.
way that you would see if you were on YouTube and you were watching in
Yes.
that minimize screen
Without
mode,
making it too obtrusive
without
too,
making it
right?
too intrusive.
Yeah.
Exactly. But being part of that experience. So we're really, we're really keen on finding the good brand fits,
Mhm.
and always open to sort of building out functionality as the platform does, because this is, like I mentioned, it's three different elements in this to
Mhm.
make a creative idea happen. So yeah, it's more we're looking to see what's possible and coming up with creative ideas that lean into our editorial true north. Like we'll never suggest anything that
Mhm.
interferes or overlays entirely the program. But I think I'm super interested to see what's been happening in sports,
Mhm.
and news, and where there is those feeds that have a requirement to always have the screen possible to come back up,
Yeah.
whilst also recognizing that everyone has to find a path to monetization to keep the channel going.
Yes.
How do you see some of those innovations in that space? Where is the best real estate on the screen that leans into the experience without overlaying it?
Mhm.
And what happens? I've seen some really interesting moves in some of the platforms where pause ads are appearing,
Yeah.
and that seems, as soon as I saw that, of course, that
And
makes a
maybe you have
ton
to
of
earn
sense.
that right? Maybe
Yes.
there's an extra fee, or maybe you're a super fan or whatever, and you get some capabilities there. QR codes is kind of interesting as a good example of something innovative. definitely intrusive potentially.
Mhm.
How much do you invest in making the big screen more interactive versus tying into your smartphone and as a sort of complementary experience for consumers?
I think it kind of goes back to that whole point about you're simultaneously serving everyone.
Yeah.
So there are types of viewers, and I am definitely guilty of this because I will be doing word puzzles whilst also watching TV. I will be second screening. I will probably have a device in my hand. And
Like most of
so
us do, right?
so yeah, so it's not as intrusive as an experience
Hmm.
for me watching as maybe someone who is more used to a more sort of traditional pay TV environment. And so it's being sensitive to the behavioral norms of the different audiences that you have, and also recognizing that if you go to most restaurants, you will have an option to not have a paper menu. You will have a QR code to access it. This has become something more of a traditional model in the same way as, it is very, if you are watching something on a device, a natural action is to swipe. We're not necessarily talking about the channel flick
Hmm.
that everyone is used to. It is swiping, and that swipe should inform what you're then served again. That swipe, I'm just going to swipe one way or the other way, and that will indicate whether or not I like this programming or I don't like this programming. I think finding ways to cater to the new behavioral norms when someone is
Hmm.
watching a piece of content and engaging with it, whilst also not being overzealous with it for audiences
Yeah.
that are more used to a traditional model.
It's funny that mentioned swipe because, one of the trends, one of the things I see, and there's limits to this, is the merging of social video and traditional video. And fast is kind of in the middle.
Yeah,
How much do you embrace that, right? How much do you make it sort of optional pop-ups and capabilities in your smartphone or whatever? Consumers are definitely much more sophisticated than they were 5 years ago. So the
absolutely.
question is, do we take their lead and say, oh, let's bake all that functionality, all that stuff they'd see in the social media world into a fast channel, or do we just keep it separate and maybe simultaneous? Any thoughts there, or is that still being kind of worked out?
Well, we've done some really interesting things in the past. We have a brilliant part of our organization called Talent Works, and they work quite a lot with content creators. And the idea really is to say there is an absolute world of social video that is completely wonderfully developed and continues to be developed. That's not necessarily something where we are taking ownership of the production process, but when you are coming to long form video, especially, I mean, even to a certain extent, short form as well. Having a collaboration between a content creator and a big production entity
Hmm.
can create really awesome shows. There was
Right.
Casper Lee and Joe Sugg, who are very big on YouTube, created shows with our Top Gear production team where they went on road trips, and that's really compelling because then you have the power of that origination of content ideas from the content creators and the power of really sophisticated production quality come together and create something that merges the worlds together.
Hmm.
When it comes to
That's a
sort of the
great example, by the way, of those
great,
two worlds coming together. That would
yeah,
work. Can you
yes.
give an example of something that would maybe not work, fall flat in terms of merging the social world and the more traditional TV viewing world?
Well, yeah, I think we have a real life example from the beginning of the fast business where a lot of the channels were short form.
Mhm.
They were using short form programming. And what happens is if you put that short form programming on a linear channel, is that people will engage with it. And there are cases where this works, but the predominant use case is that you give people a reason to leave more
Right.
quickly.
They're on
If I'm
YouTube.
working,
Like, why do they need that, right?
right. I think that there is a, it's hard to it's okay if it's introducing you to the chance to watch for longer somewhere
Mhm.
else. I understand that. It's essentially a Barker mechanism, but if you are constantly showing very, very short footage,
Mhm.
then that is basically, something that is recycled from other models, like the
Mhm.
the TikTok and Reels model, where that type of programming works really well, and you just have an endless sort of swipe up environment. That's very compelling in that phone environment, but I'm not sure I would. I think I would feel exhausted after watching that. And I think that there has been a big evolution toward long form video, and we see people watching fast channels for really long periods of time. There's a bit of a misnomer because the business of fast often gets called the lean back business, and it is lean back because you're not asking the consumer to uh, opt in and watch a specific show. They're following you. They're
Right.
following your brand, or they're following the show, and they're allowing you to do that. That part is lean back, but when they're actually watching, it's as lean in as any
Yeah,
other
that
media.
it's interesting. That is a misnomer. I mean,
Yeah.
initially the attraction, I think, and still is the passive lean back experience. Fast looks like your traditional linear. You can just turn on a channel and it plays for you. What is the balance between, and it's interesting because you're GM of fast, but also VOD sales.
Yeah.
Is there sort of a hybrid environment where you've got your fast channels, but you also have the option to kind of delve down into the VOD library because that might
Yes.
trigger a synapse and say, I want to watch this movie or these shows. And how do you present that to
Yeah.
the consumer in sort of a content discovery process?
Yeah, absolutely. And we see this a little bit like I was saying earlier, we see different forms of engagement on the different platforms. And some of the platforms that we work with are much more focused on video on demand, and that is where they see the majority of their activity happening. So fast becomes a complement to that. So Tubi, for example,
Mhm.
has identified themselves. I'm not speaking up turn here. They say this themselves that they are, very much a VOD led experience, and they have, I think, 250 fast channels that sort of complement their offering and provide. If you don't know what you're going to watch, try this here, and then you can go off and sort of expand into that world. Whereas someone like Pluto tends to be much more fast forward,
Right.
if you pardon the pun, with now a lot more video on demand optionality and how you see those two sort of tabs as they were working together. And I think, it depends on the mechanism, it depends on the
Mhm.
platform, but there are lots of ways that we can help support that. But what we do see is that uh, it's not necessarily the same content that works in both formats equally. We see a lot of amazing performance on our factual entertainment shows in the linear space. And there's logic to that. That programming was made for a linear experience, and it
Mhm.
plays very well, something that's very easy to come into and watch when it's on. And you don't have to start from episode one. But if you're watching something that is quite a sophisticated, complex, scripted plot,
Mhm.
you are going to want to go and find season one. You might try the episode, and maybe this is why, for example, that crime TV is very popular in the fast space, because those tend to have
Mhm.
episodes that have a beginning, middle, and end within that one
Right.
episode.
And
But
that's
there
why a
is
lot of people
also,
say that VOD, episodic VOD, is still fast because it's going to just autoplay to the next episode, right? Or related content. So it is curated in that way.
yeah, yeah, and exactly through experimentation and through, to your point, yeah, full on curation,
Mhm.
to serve you something and to switch you over to something else when that feels appropriate for a more linear experience. Whereas if you go to a homepage for a VOD experience, you will be able to dive wholly deeply into one subject matter if you want to. And I think what is also interesting in the VOD space is that we're sort of benefiting from the learnings that we're getting in our fast feeds, in the genre feeds, to inform what goes best with what. If you have a page with lots of different VOD shows on it, what works? Is it
Mhm.
that, the same presenter is in a lot of the shows, the same actor is in a lot of the shows? Is it more about the mood that the show is portraying and providing other things that are part of that mood? Is it more about this is the most sort of award-winning collection that you can get? And so we do very brilliant work. It's not me, it's my team doing brilliant work to kind of carefully curate packages, and are constantly having. That's why VOD and Fast sit in the same team here.
Yep.
Constantly having that conversation to say what worked for you yesterday,
Mhm.
and this is what's working for me over here, and this is what we see our most viewed stuff on VOD. Use that to inform what's next done in Fast. So they're very
That
complementary.
makes sense. And you don't
Yeah.
want to be at loggerheads. I mean, it makes sense to think about that. You're serving some of the same, but sometimes different audiences in different ways. But it's got to be part of that holistic process of what is the right fit for that particular segment of the audience. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the industry at large. I mean, Beth, you're an upbeat, positive person, and You've done some great things in your career. The industry's struggling in some ways. We've had some massive layoffs. I don't want to mention any brands, people that have, built careers for 20 years and now sort of on the sidelines. And some of that has to do with the financial health of the industry. Some of it just has to do with viewing habits changing. Where, if you pick one or two issues that are the biggest issues in the industry right now, and maybe recommend like how do we fix those challenges? I'd love to kind of tap into your brain a little bit.
A simple question then, isn't it, really? Just how we
Yeah, I
fix it.
know there's no quick answer, right?
No, there isn't, and you're right. I mean, this is a really seismic time in
Hmm.
our business. I always like to remind people when they first come and work in the team that one of my first clients was MySpace. Um, and MySpace was, huge, right? It was absolutely huge at the
Yeah,
time.
people forget.
Um,
Yeah.
and a little bit like Blockbuster, household names that should have had a long-standing existence in the video landscape, but didn't necessarily capitalize on the rate of change.
Hmm.
I think that what carves us through, what helps us, is this idea of maintaining a truth to bring back my beginning point,
Hmm.
the audience. What does the audience want? And I think that, we have been having this beautiful moment for a long time now where there has still been a lot of value in more traditional media types, and there's been an enormous growth in and a competitive growth in
Yep.
more digital first environments. Now we're seeing that digital first environment be something that's more prominent and something that's preferred by audiences, and we have an enormous amount more time spent not just on video but also in the social space.
Hmm.
That is very complicated as a picture. And that's why I think, the key is to identify where audiences want to be and be there
Okay.
with the functionality that they want,
Hmm.
and recognize that there are other paths um to commercialization. How are we making money? And does it have to look
Hmm.
like the way that we've made money before? And it's not easy. This stuff is absolutely at the top of every single company's mind,
Hmm.
but this takes time. And I think
Yeah.
there's a need to have patience and a bit of grit. And this stuff is really, really hard right now. I mean, it's devastating to see the impacts on the
It
industry.
is. And I think you're hitting on a key thing is we don't have pat answers, but you got to constantly embrace change and innovation.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is you can be doom and gloom, but advertising is increasing, I think 4 or 5% this year, which isn't, for fast, it's 20+%, which is great.
Mhm.
So, you got to kind of capture that, but a lot of people are talking about the streaming dollars, being more dimes and quarters and not replacing the traditional revenue. So every industry goes through that change if it's going to
Yeah.
survive. And we're kind of going through those growth pains right now. I think I'm also optimistic that thing will emerge stronger as an industry. What are your thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
I think so. I mean, I think a lot of the places that initially gave companies $25 checks are now, trillion cap organizations, right? Like
Hmm.
we have to start somewhere, and the reality is we don't always get it right first time as a
Hmm.
business, as an industry. And I think that um we owe it, I think, particularly to the advertising community,
Hmm.
to bring contextual ways of serving brands in ways that have, affinity, that we're at this moment where there has been quite a lot of blindness to
Hmm.
what happens. What is the impact of this campaign? What is how are we actually knowing that this thing is really the thing that's driving our business forward? And we are living in an environment with a lot more data than we
Yeah.
than we had before. But it's not just about the data. Big data is also it's a blessing and a curse, because you
Yeah.
can get lost in it, you can swim in it. So how do we do it in a way that is making the campaigns and making the activities and making that spend, whether it be the consumer or the advertiser, mean something, have impact? And
Hmm.
that comes with a real collaboration, a round table effort
Hmm.
between, and I sound like I'm talking about Thanksgiving dinner most of the time on this because it's not always easy. Everyone has their own priorities, but coming together as a business is I think uh imperative. I think it's
Yeah.
there's no other way of doing it. It's recognizing that
Yep.
there's wealth and power in every single part of this process, but the best way to make a more sustained
Yeah.
path to profit is to work together and not have a lot of siloed efforts.
And I agree with that. It requires a certain level of humility and
Yes,
self-honesty as well. I think some
yes.
of the major sort of challenges we've seen in the last few years that have led to some of these massive layoffs are executives with their head in the sand and just not reading the tea leaves, the signs of the times, and adjusting appropriately and over-promising to Wall Street, So hopefully, a lot of the streaming services have now announced profitability this year. That's been a big milestone. Not enough to, replace the profits that might have been lost from, the traditional world. But yeah, I mean, some good trends. We're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and I do. I recognize sometimes I can be a bit of a Pollyanna, but I also think there's moments where we absolutely should be real about what's happening in the business. My personality type doesn't like spending too much time in that zone
Hmm.
because there's so much to do. There's so much
Yes.
that we can do, and the only way things get better is if we do.
Yeah.
And so that's yeah, my slight optimism is from
That's
a
okay.
self-motivation.
It takes Pollyannas to drive innovation,
I
hopefully
think
charge
so.
up the next till and make things happen. You've done that throughout your career. We're running out of time here. I want to shift gears a little bit. One of the things we like to do in this podcast is just ask our guests, personal interest or a hobby that you can share with our audience.
Yeah, mine is incredibly. I'm very proudly very geeky. I'm a massive fan of Doctor Who, and I love passion projects and people who are passionate about anything. My current passion project is actually quite adorable. I have a 5-year-old, and every day, every evening, I take about an hour to sit and draw a cartoon and put it in her lunchbox the next day.
No, that's so adorable. Aw.
I will happily show some pictures of
I
what
hope
those
she
look
saves
like.
them, just crumple them up because like 20 years from now, you want to like put that in some sort of a portfolio, I think, right?
In an album, I'll be a puddle in the corner weeping over it, I'm sure. But yeah, no, I do, and it's used partly, to help inspire conversation because being 5, it's really hard to make conversation.
Yeah.
But it's also just it's a really nice sort of activity. I tend to find my best thinking happens when I'm not physically at keys. And it's a moment of just not being switched on to any screens and being able to kind of think of someone else while you're doing something. But it's lovely. I highly recommend drawing, even if you don't think you're very good at it. I'm not particularly good at drawing. I'm definitely not a Picasso, but it is really nice to do that. It's nice
Yeah.
to have something tangible as well, and have something that you sit down and you do, and then it's done. This is the world that we live in is never finished, and so there's a sort of peace to doing something as
Oh,
silly as
good for you.
cartoon.
We all need those creative outlets, and we can never forget, like, we can never completely lose the eyes of a child when we look at the world with wonder, because it is
So
wonderful, and there's, crazy things happening, but there's amazing things too, and that's why we're in this industry, right? We're storytelling, we're engaging with audiences, and yeah, I mean, wouldn't it be great to just, flick a switch and go back to looking through the eyes of a 5-year-old and looking at the world? That would be kind of cool.
I mean, I think that's why Fast is as popular as it is and streaming is as popular as it is. There's a lot of nostalgia viewing there and comfort and something, familiar. So yeah, you never stop being 5. You just have additional years added to the rings of your tree, as far as I'm concerned.
I
You
still don't
remember
know what I
yourself
want to
5.
be when I grow up, so I can totally
I know I
I
always
can,
want to say a ballerina or an astronaut or something, right?
I don't know. We'll figure it out at some point. Well, listen, Beth, I really enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, me too.
I love, leaving it on a hopeful note like that. Like, the future, your daughter's the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
And let's see where the industry, goes in the next, 15, 20 years. It's pretty exciting.
Let's enjoy being part of the conversation.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. This is Brian Mahoney, CEO of Trend Research and the president of the OTT Executive Community on behalf of OTT Executive Podcast, and Beth Anderson from BBC Studios signing off today. Everybody have a great day.